Hi everyone, I'm Simonne. I'm a cocaine addict. Thank you very much to the committee for a job well done. You guys did an amazing job, and thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this. I'd just like to take a moment and invite God into the room so that he can speak through me. You know, I'm very, very grateful to cocaine, actually. You know, if it wasn't for cocaine, I wouldn't have found my way into these rooms. You know, I'm going to share a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Hopefully you guys will be able to relate and not look at the differences, but at the similarities. I grew up in Moncton, New Brunswick. I grew up in an alcoholic, dysfunctional family. You know, and you know, my first addiction was penny candies. So I stole money from my mom's wallet to support that habit. You know, I soon went to cigarettes, and I stole to support that habit. And I masterminded my first B&E when I was about 6.5 years old, because my neighbors had piggy banks full of money, and I wanted it. And I never knew at that time that it was all to cover up feelings that I didn't want to feel, you know. And so I'm going to fast forward to about when I was 12 years old. We were at the cottage, and some of the boys came up to us, and we were 3 girls, and asked us if we wanted anything from the bootlegger. And we said, well, what can we get? And he said, well, you can get a bottle of wine for $1.50. So you guys can imagine the quality of that wine. So we had $3 between the 3 of us, so we gave him $3, and we got a couple bottles of wine. And we knew what the guy's intentions were, so we told him to buzz off, and we went off on our own. And the other 2 girls took a swig of the wine and spit it out. And I said, here, let me try. And I proceeded to drink a bottle and a half of the wine. And needless to say, I was totally intoxicated, obnoxious. They couldn't get rid of me fast enough. They dropped me off at the doorsteps of the cottage. And, you know, my mom came out and dragged me inside and asked me what was wrong. And I looked at her and said, somebody put some LSD in my fish and chips, right? Right, and, you know, I thought that sounded good. I had no idea what LSD was, but, you know. So my mom goes up the street to find out who had put LSD in my fish and chips, and she finds my friends, and they've got my jean jacket, my pack of smokes, and my runners, and so she approaches them and talks to them, and they look at her and they start laughing. They go, she's drunk. She drank a bottle and a half of wine. So, you know, in the book it tells us, you know, given sufficient reasons, we can stop and we can abstain, right? Well, that night I was so sick, and the next morning I was so hungover, right, that was sufficient reason for me to abstain from alcohol for a number of years. Right? But that thing that they called LSD was right around the corner, and I tried it, and I fell in love, right? And then I met a boy, right? And, you know, and this guy would come over, and, you know, at that time I was only smoking pot, and, you know, he would come over, and he would be so wasted. And I kept going, like, what is going on here, you know? And, you know, after, you know, several weekends of seeing this, you know, the book talks about frothy emotional appeals, right? You know, so I found out that he was doing some chemicals, right? And so, you know, I pleaded with him, I cried with him, you know, if only you loved me, you would stop, you know, and none of that worked, right? So my smart thinking goes, well, if you can't beat them, you might as well join them, right? So I did. So, you know, and off our career went, and you know, I stayed in that relationship for 12 years, and it was abusive, mentally, physically, sexually, but I didn't know any difference. You know, I just kept getting highs just to numb the feeling, so I wouldn't have to face reality. You know, and And then the last straw, I had enough, and I decided to leave him. And then I started burning both ends of the candle, and then I found my soon-to-be husband. I found him. I don't know if you guys know Vancouver, but I found him. He was a musician, and I found him at the Balmoral. Friends of mine were playing there. That's a hotel that's right on Skid Row on Hastings, and we went there to see them play, and I fell in love with this guy, right? And before I met him, my girlfriend and I used to go out, and she introduced me to Jack, and I fell in love with Jack Daniels, and so I did one or the other. If there was no dope, right, then I would drink. If there was dope, I chose dope, right? And it just so happened that this guy's drink was Jack Daniels too, so we hit it off. And and what I didn't know about this guy was that he was an alcoholic, and something growing up in my household, I hated drunks. I still do. I can't stand a drunk. And I didn't want to be anything like them, so I chose to do drugs instead of drinking. And, so him and I would go out and we'd get pretty sloshed, and it was affecting him more than what I could see. And so we went out for supper one night, and he said to me that he was going to stop drinking. And I looked at him and I said, I'll stop drinking too, right? All in the name of love, right? I love this guy. I would do anything, right? So I stopped drinking and to support him. And it was, when I look back at it, I'm very grateful that he chose that particular moment to stop drinking. I believe in that line. Once you cross that line, you can't come back. And it was just right before I crossed that line of no return. And but what I didn't do is I didn't stop smoking pot, right? And he was a musician, so he'd go off to work, and I'd smoke joint, whatever, right? Everything was okay. And one day I come home, and we had just bought a house. We had just bought in a house, and we had gotten married. We bought a house, and I come home one day, and for whatever reason, right, I went into his pocket. And like Kenny was talking about, I was being smart, right? I was putting 10% away, right? So I would go in his pocket and I'd take money, and I'd go and I'd put it into our RSP account to be able to save up to buy this house. And one day I went into his pocket, have no reason, I have no idea why. Today I look at it as a God shot. I went in his pocket and I found this envelope, and I opened it up and I found a bunch of flaps, and I flipped out. I just lost it. I went ballistic because I knew where that was going to take us, right? As I'm flipping out, I steal some, right? He goes off to work, and I do it. Now I wake up this monster, right? I hadn't done chemicals in years. I hadn't done cocaine in years, right? And I wake up this monster. Now I want more. How am I going to get more? Where am I going to get more? I don't know anybody, right? He's an honest guy, right? So I figured out this perfect little means of getting more. I created this triangle. So it went from my employer's bank account to my bank account to the dealer. And what I did is in order for, I couldn't tell him that I was stealing money, right? He would have made me go and pay it back. So what I did is I created friends who wanted to buy some. So we would buy it in large quantities, and my friends, I was selling it to them, right? And so we buy an ounce, and I would sell 20 grams, and we would split the 8 grams, right? But my friends were in my head. They were fictional, right? So I'd have all of this, and he'd go to work, and we'd have some hidden, and still having all of this was not enough. I still wanted more, so I would I would go into the room that he would hide it in, because he used to hide it. He used to leave me, like 10 little lines, one for every hour, and then at 10 o'clock I had to go to bed because I had to wake up the next morning. Like, who does that, right? So he would leave me these lines, and I would go and I'd push them all in together, and then just one, and because I had this big bag full, right? And so this went on for a long period of time, and there were times where I would go, I can't do this anymore. I want to stop, but I just didn't know how to stop, right? So I would, say, well, Sue moved to the island, and then all of a sudden, Linda just came from Calgary, right? So like I'd move one out and another one would come in, and the circles just kept going on and on. And my employer would ask why we were in such desperation, and why we were in the red, and and I'd come up with all these excuses and all these stories, and I'd blame his son, and and it just started getting so unmanageable, right? And I just couldn't stop. There's a part in our readings, and who's a cocaine addict, if you guys have read it, and there's a part that says, there comes a time when I couldn't even breathe, right? But I sure could inhale. It didn't stop me. I ended up getting sick. I ended up in the hospital with pneumonia. It still didn't stop me, and I went on short-term disability, and then my employer called me up, and I was about to go back to work, because my supply had stopped, right? That there was a break in my perfect little triangle. And my employer called me up, and he said that he had hired a CGA to come in and get the books all caught up, so that when I got back to work, that I could just start nice and clean, because I was so far behind on my work, because I was too busy being in the bathroom or in the little back room getting high all day, right? And at that moment, I felt a sense of peace and release, and I thought, I can finally breathe, right? Because I knew that as soon as they opened up one bank statement, that I would be caught, right? So as soon as I hung up the phone, the fear hit. And I thought, shit, what am I going to do now? So then I started cashing in on all of our assets, right? I started cashing in all his RSPs without him knowing about it. I got a line of credit on the house. I maxed that all up. Credit cards, maxed them all up. Went into the bank with him. He was thinking that we were going in to get a lower interest rate. We had 5 years left to pay on the house. When we walked out, we had 25 years to pay on the house, right? And, it was just escalating. It's just escalating. There was one point I was coming home from work, and, I lived 25 minutes away from work, and it would take me an hour to get to work because I kept having to stop. And one time I was going home, and, it talks about that in that reading as well. We scraped the envelopes, and I stopped, and I was scraping everything all out of all the flaps and smoking it up. And all of a sudden, I see a police car going up the street. My head said, get the fuck out of there, right? My addict said, have another hoot, right? So there I go. Then I look up again, now the cop car is right directly behind me. My head says, roll down the window, start crying, because I was parked right at a cemetery, start crying and, pretend that you're mourning somebody, right? You lost somebody. My addict goes, no. Next thing I know, I look over and the cop is there. I roll down the window. There was so much smoke in my car that he actually thought my car was on fire. He asked me to get out of the car. He's looking for the source of the fire, right, until he finds my stash, right? Then the handcuffs come out, right? And so now I'm under arrest, and he thought he had me for possession. I'm in the back of the car thinking, they're all empty, because I just finished scraping everything out. I get into the holding cell, and I'm thinking, they didn't find the little, the fifth pocket in your jeans. Well, I had a flap in there. They didn't find that. Maybe I should take that out and have a hoot. And I thought, oh, shit, there's probably cameras all around. I better not do that, right? You would think that would be enough to have stopped me, but no, it wasn't. I was, the charges got stayed, but I had to go to seek help. I was going in there high. I didn't care. Nothing stopped me. But what did end up happening is I came home one day, fast forward 5 years of doing this. I come home and there's these 2 huge envelopes sitting on our kitchen table. And I said, what's that? My husband's in the other room, he's doing the line. And he goes, oh, the notary public that we went to, the lawyers that we went to, were waiting for me when I came home and handed me these envelopes. And I went, oh, shit. I knew, because the Notary Republic that we used was the same one that my employer used. I opened up the envelopes, and all I could say is, oh, my God, I'm so sorry, I'm going to jail. Oh, my God, I'm so sorry, I'm going to jail. And he's in the other room going, what are you talking about? I said, I stole some money, I'm going to jail. Oh, my God, I'm so sorry. And he said, how much money are you talking about? And I said, $956,526.78. At that moment, that was the first time I had been honest. Now, one of our readings is how honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. Well, that was the first time in 5 years, and probably my entire life, that I had been honest, right? And had told somebody what I had been doing for the last 5 years. And all I wanted to do was do the right thing. A little too late, but not. The next day, that was on a Sunday night. The next day, I called a lawyer friend, the same lawyer that had gotten me off the other charge, and told him I needed some help again. And so he got me some representation. He was a friend of my husband's. And, It took me a long time to be able to tell my family, and my family's very small. I have a sister and a brother out in BC, one back at East, and one was in prison. And so I eventually was able to tell my sister what I had been doing, because nobody had any idea what I was up to, what had been going on. On the outside, it looked like everything was okay. And she asked me if I wanted to have a family meeting, and I said yes. So my brother came over, and her husband was there, and my sister, and I told them what I had been doing, and my brother asked me if I wanted help, and I said yes. So my sister is from another fellowship, the Mother Fellowship, and she's made the phone call. It just happened, God shot, I believe, that her sponsor's husband was a member of Cocaine Anonymous, and he came over on a Wednesday night at 9:30 at night and 12-stepped me. He asked me one important question: are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? And I was so beaten. I was so tired. All those lies, all the hurt, all the harm, I was just physically, emotionally drained. Not needless to say, financially as well, right? But it was more the feeling of demoralization, and he asked me if I wanted to go to a meeting of Cocaine Anonymous, and I said yes. And he said, I'll meet you on Friday night, we'll go to a meeting. I said, okay. So now the little wheel in my head is going off. This is going to look good in court, right? This is going to look really good in court. So for the next 2 days, that's what's going around in my head. So he picks me up, and off we go to a meeting. And I had no idea what I was walking into. I knew about AA. When I was about 6 years old, there was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous outside in the back, in the alleyway right beside where I lived. They had Kool-Aids and cookies, so we used to go in there to get Kool-Aids and cookies until they told us that we couldn't do that anymore. I had asked my dad to go so that we could get more cookies and Kool-Aids. He went. It didn't work, so I didn't think that it worked. But I knew that it worked for my sister, so there must have been something, And then, so I'm sitting at my first meeting, and I'm kind of scared, terrified, don't know, grateful at the same time, scared, full of fear, not knowing what to expect, And they started talking, and one lady said, and I'll never forget, she said, "It's really good to be in a meeting of Cocaine Anonymous because I can freely talk about what is killing me." Now, I don't know if it was the word cocaine that made my ears perk up, maybe, right? But I started paying attention. At halftime, this girl that's sitting beside me starts talking to me, and she's got 4.5 years clean, and I'm going, but you must smoke pot. And she goes, "No, I abstain from everything, but you must drink." And she said, "No, again, I abstain from everything." So, well, if you're 4.5 years clean, what are you doing here on a Friday night? I had no clue, right? And she said to me, "To pass on to you what was so freely passed on to me." And I'm going, what the hell does that mean, right? I had no clue. Today I know, right? Today I know that unless I freely give to others what was so freely given to me, I don't get to keep what I have, right? So today I know that, she passed a meeting guide to all the women that were in the rooms, and gave it to me. And, and when they came back, when they came back from halftime, they were all laughing and they were all happy, and, they all looked like they were friends. And I'm going, I want that. How in the hell do I get that? And then my mind opened up, so there's the honesty, the open-mindedness. My mind opened up, and then when I got home, I thought, maybe I stand a chance. Maybe there is hope for me after all. So I opened up that meeting guide, and there was a meeting on Saturday night, but it was in Vancouver. I didn't trust myself to go there, right? But there was a meeting on Sunday, not too far from, in U.S., not too far from where I lived. So I went there. I found the willingness to walk into the next meeting on my own, and then there was a meeting at the same location on Monday night. So I went back, and this girl approached me and said, "You were here yesterday." I said, "Yes, I was." And she said, "Do you have a sponsor?" And I'm thinking, a sponsor? No. Isn't it, I'm thinking to myself, isn't a sponsor someone who gives you stuff, right? No, I don't have one of those. She said, "Do you have a big book?" Now, remember, I told you my husband was an alcoholic. He had tried AA back in the 80s, and he had this book sitting on our shelves called Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I said, "Well, we have one at home sitting on the shelf. I could dust it off and use it." She said, "Good." And so she said, "I'll be your temporary sponsor until you find somebody." I went, okay. So then I go home and I open up this book and I'm starting to read it, and I'm going, what the hell is this, right? I can't, I can read it, but it ain't making any sense to me, and I'm lost, right? So I'm at another meeting, and then all of a sudden they make this announcement that area is going to be the following Sunday. And I said to the guy sitting beside me, I said, "What's that?" He said, "Write that date down. You need to be there." I went, okay. So they told me, if you want what we have, do as we do, right? So I thought, okay, I'll show up. So I wrote the date down, I wrote the address down, and then I showed up to area. Didn't know why, just member at large, and I listened to what was going on. I go back to another meeting, and then all of a sudden the same guy announces that he's having a step group, and it's starting the next Wednesday. And I turn around and I look at him and go, "Can I join?" And he looks at me and he goes, okay. Not that I know that it was a men's only step group, and now it's opened up to women too, right? So I joined the step group, and my sponsor made the big book come alive with me, right? So she and I spent a lot of time going over the book, and then I was able to relate to it, and I started to do my steps. Now, my first sponsor was 25 years younger than me, right? And I thought, what the hell is this kid going to teach me, right? But she taught me a lot. She got me through the first set of steps. She got me connected. What she taught me was about accountability. What she taught me was self-esteem. What she taught me was about confidentiality. What she taught me was about confidence, right? She didn't have a car. She would we would meet somewhere. She never expected me to go and pick her up. We would make a meeting place. She was always there on time, right? And anything that I shared with her never got back out to the rooms, right? And when I shared my step 5 with her, right, it was the most freeing experience I ever had, right? It was like when I walked into the park to meet her, it was like I was walking in with a backpack full of bricks, and as the more I revealed and the more I told, the lighter my load got. And at the very end of it, she said, "How do you feel?" And I literally was feeling like I was floating on cloud 9. Like I felt so light, so free. I had finally gotten rid of all of that stuff that was here, all the stuff that kept me bogged down and sick. The big book gives us clear-cut instructions. You take that hour afterwards, and you go back and you read the first 5 steps. And so I was going to my step group. So I stopped at a park, and it was quite a busy place. It was right on the corner of a busy intersection, and I'm sitting there, and I'm having a conversation with God in the middle of his living room, and I don't care that there's people around. To me, it was just me and him, right? And I'm having this conversation, there's all these little no-see-me bugs floating around my head, right? And I said, God, they were so annoying, right? I said, God, please make them go away. And then all of a sudden, poof, they disappeared, right? And I actually took my sunglasses off, and I'm going like this, right? And anybody walking by would have gone, she's flailing, right? But I couldn't believe that they had disappeared, right? They did come back, but the point was that God showed his presence, and I felt it, and I like to say that was that I stayed with my first sponsor. Like I said, I was going to go to jail any time now. That's all I thought about, right? And I went to other fellowships as well, but I never felt that connection. I never felt that bond with the people. And they would ask me to be of service, and I'd say, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm going to jail any minute now. And, CA asked me to be of service, and I said, I can't, I'm going to jail any minute now. And they said, you can still be of service. And when and if that time comes, we'll deal with it then, right? And I went, oh, okay. So I'm glad I took that advice and became of service, right? So I was the coffee maker, right? And I noticed that before, the guy that was making the coffee, he would come in a little bit late, and then you guys would go to get coffee. It was like dirty water because it wasn't ready yet. So when they voted me in to be the coffee maker, now I don't drink coffee. I don't know anything about making coffee. But what I did is I showed up a half an hour early to make the best coffee I possibly could for you guys, because it was important that when you guys walked into the rooms and you guys went to get coffee, that it would be actually a cup of coffee, right? And, I had started going to area, and I noticed that one of the groups that I was going to that was pretty close to my place didn't have a GSR at area, and so I went to that group, and they said, can I be you guys' GSR? I'm going to area for no reason, so I might as well go for a purpose. And they said, well, you need to be a home group member first. I said, well, can I join? And so they let me join. Now you got to remember, I'm like 45 days clean, right? And they allowed me to be of service. And, and that started my journey at area, and, the next position I got, I couldn't wait to get 90 days, right, so that I could go and be part of H&I, and then, so I'm now at 30 days clean, and I show up at the meeting, and I'm sitting in the car, and I look at the door, and I go, holy shit, it's a guy that I worked with at the place where I embezzled all the money from. He's there. He's a spy. They send him to search me out. Oh no, I can't go in. So I walk around. The meeting was in the hospital. I walk around the hospital. I go into the Tim Hortons, and there's a guy that's there. I goes to the meeting, and I said, it's my 30 days today, and I can't even go in and get my fob. And he said, why not? I said, there's a guy there that from my work, I can't go in. And he looked at me, and he goes, what makes you think that you're so much that? He said, what makes you think that the guy isn't there because he has a problem? That never had occurred to me, right? So I went into the meeting, and, I said hello and held my head down, and, I went up and I got my 30-day fob, and he was there as a newcomer, and, and I still in my head thought that he was still there to spy on me, but, he was introduced himself as a newcomer. He took a newcomer fob. The book gives us clear-cut instructions on how to make amends, right? And not to, when the opportunity presents itself, not to shy away from it, right? I had done him some harm, because when at work, right, it was like I was looking at myself when I saw him, and I didn't want that, so I was trying to get rid of him. So I badmouthed him, I tried to get rid of him. And one day I'm going to my drug and alcohol counselor, and I park, and I'm walking there. He's sitting on the park bench, on the bus bench, waiting for the bus. And I walk, and he's here, and I get about here, and I can't take another step forward. It's like I'm stuck in cement. I can't go forward, right? I had to turn around and go back and sit down beside him and make an amends to him. When I made that amends to him, I wished him the best in recovery. And when I saw him in the rooms, I genuinely had compassion for him. I didn't think that he was there to report on me, and if he did, it didn't matter anymore. Everybody deserves an opportunity to get clean, and who am I to stop anybody, right? So then the time came. I'm 13 days shy of 2 years, right? My lawyer said you should get some letters of recommendations, character reference letters, right? The only people I know are the members of Cocaine Anonymous. So I go to some members that have some clean time, and I ask them if they'd be willing to write me a letter of character reference. More members wrote me letters giving the court their full name, their address, their telephone numbers, right? It's an anonymous program, right? They did that. When I went into court to get sentenced, I was shocked at the number of people from CA that were sitting there, right? One guy even wore a suit, which was like, holy shit, it's just kind of mind-blowing, right? And, the family that I always craved, I actually found in Cocaine Anonymous. So when it came time, the lawyer wanted me to take a plea, and I was always the type of person who said, if you do the crime, you have to do the time. But I didn't really think that applied to me before I walked into these rooms, and then it did apply to me. I did the crime, I have to do the time, right? And I said, no, it's not in my hands. I'm going to leave it up to God, and whatever I deserve is what's going to happen, right? So the service positions that I had, I was now the outreach chair. And so the time comes, I'm standing in front of the judge, and the judge looks at me and does not believe that I spent the money on cocaine. Doesn't believe that I'm an addict, because now I'm 13 days shy of 2 years. And, we clean up well, right? And, so she's handed me over a 4-year sentence to maximum prison, right? So I go to prison. I get stripped of everything, right? Get stripped away from the program, get stripped away from my support group, stripped away from my family, right? When I was about 45 days, I had gone to a women's retreat, and the speaker had said, nobody can take your clean time away from you but yourself, right? And I remembered that. And when they and then she had done this little dance, right? So when they told me to bend over, right? So I kind of jiggled my butt and thought to myself, nobody can take my clean time away from me, right? And when I was inside, I tried to help others, but only if they wanted it, right? I brought in more AA big books, 12 by 12s. They wouldn't let me open up a meeting inside. There was another member, she's actually from Edmonton, that was there inside with me, and she had been a member of Cocaine Anonymous, so her and I started a meeting outside in the yard. One day I'm sitting there in the yard, and this name came over the intercom. I'm just going to back up a little bit. So when I was in my first step group, and we were doing step 8, making a list. Now, I spent 33 years in my addiction, right? So in 33 years, I did a whole hell of a lot of harm, right, to a whole lot of people, right? And I'm going, how am I ever going to find these people, right? I don't even know where they are. I don't even know some of them, right? How am I going to make these amends? And the guy looked at me and he said, don't worry, God will put them in your path when you're ready. I'm going, what the fuck does that mean, right? Like, what? Huh? Okay, I'll go with that, right? So I'm sitting in the yard, and this name comes over the intercom. I go, holy shit, I owe that person an amends. They weren't on my list. I didn't even remember. But as soon as I heard that name, I knew. So off to my cell I go. I take down my big book because it gives us clear-cut instructions on how to make an amends, right? My sponsor always said to me, before you go and make an amends, check your motives. What are your motives for making this amends? Because the last thing you want to do is making an amends for making an amends, right? So I checking my motives on why I want to do this, and the harm that I had done, right? And the book also tells us that we don't shy away. So the next time I saw that person, I went up to them and I introduced myself. I said, you may not remember me, right? And it had something to do with my brother. And so I mentioned my brother's name, and he said, I remember. And I told him what I had done. And I asked him if there was anything I could do to right the wrongs that I had done. And he said for me to continue doing what I had done, what I was doing, right? And, I walked away from there. I walked away and I had the biggest smile on my face. I had found, it tells us, that we will find a newfound serenity. I found serenity behind barbed wire fence. I was walking around with a smile on my face because I had total serenity. The other women are looking at me going, wipe that shitty grin off your face, right? And I couldn't because I had content, right? So when I went in, we were having a convention in September, so I got sentenced in February, And I was supposed to be the registration chair for that convention. And then I got sentenced. And so I had put in, when I first came in, because, grandiose was one of my biggest character defects, right? So don't you know who I think I am? So as soon as I went in, I put in for a leave, right? And so they're going, like, you can't do that. And I'm going, why not? Right? So I put in for a leave so that I could have an escort to go to the convention. And the warden ended up granting me that leave. She gave me a 10-hour pass with an escort to go to our convention. When I walked into that convention, I totally felt at home, right? I was with my people again, right? And when we got back to the prison, the escort looks at me and goes, was there one person in that room that didn't hug you? Right? And the feeling of family and the feeling of love that I had felt, right, was something I had craved my entire life, and I had found it in these rooms, and and then my journey went on. I like to say that I walked into these rooms in March of 2006. I like to say that that's my clean date, but it is not. My clean date is April 23rd, 2012. I couldn't wrap my head around being an alcoholic because I could take a drink and put it down. And there's a part in the big book that says, if you can do that, my hat goes off to you. And I thought, that's me, right? And so I had a drink, and I co-signed somebody else having a drink, and I watched that person go down a very dark, dark hole, and it watched her go out and not be able to find her way back into these rooms for many years, right? And, it made me stop and think, and I remember going into a meeting of an AA meeting. My sponsor was from AA. And we walked into the meeting, and when we walked out, I was irritable, discontent, and irate. And she said, what is wrong? And I said, I'm thinking of my family, right? They didn't do what I did. They can't relate to what I did, right? I can't relate with what they do, right? I'm not like them, right? And she looked at me and she said, well, maybe it's because you're just like them. What the fuck, right? I gotta go. I get in my car and I'm in my head, right? Who the hell does she think she is? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm driving down the road and I'm going, well, maybe I should drink every day and become one of them so that I can relate. And then I slammed on the brakes, not looking behind me. Thank God there was nobody behind me. Slam on the brakes and go, who the hell thinks like that? An alcoholic. Holy shit, I'm an alcoholic. I had spent 4 years trying to convince a psychologist that I was better than, right? And she's going, tell me again how you think you're better than an alcoholic. You're a drug addict that's buying dope and it's not legal, and but I just couldn't wrap my head around it, And, so that was the last time I took a drink was April 22nd. And in July, I called her up after watching my friend, from April to July, going down that hole and going deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And I called her up and I said, I'm changing my clean date. I said, I'm changing my date. It doesn't change what I've done. It doesn't change the service that I did for the fellowship. It doesn't change the women that I've sponsored. It doesn't change the work I've done, the step work that I've done. What it's doing is it's changing my date. And she said, okay. And then she made me go to AA for a year. So I did, and so I went back forward to about year 5, and there was a lot of growth in that year. I had changed sponsors, and we have a reaching out, and it's not until I've offered my own forgiveness that I was able to forgive others, and she had me do some work on myself, and make an amends to myself. All those feelings, I no longer have drugs to numb those feelings, right? So I go back to my first addiction. I go to the corner store and I buy $10 worth of junk food. And I come back and I stuff my face so I can numb those feelings, right? So I end up working on this letter of amends, and I practice it, and I do it, a living amends to myself on a day-to-day basis. And then came the time that she said, now you have to make an amends to your victim. And I said, okay. She said, I want you to go home and write them a letter. Write a letter. Right? So I go home and I, take out the big book again because it gives us clear-cut instructions. I'll never get over using and drinking until I write all the wrongs I have done. This is what I have done, and my pen stops. I can't go any further. Right? How can I go any further? Step 9 tells me to make amends except when to do so would injure them or others. If I write down everything I did to them, they don't even know half of it. Right? How can I do that? Right? So I call her up and I go, I can't do this. Right? I said, my pen will not go any further. And she said, the letter is not for them. The letter is for you. The letter is for you to own all of the stuff. And Kenny said it today, pen to paper. Put it down on paper. See it in black and white. Okay, that I can do. So I would write a little bit and then off to the corner store again, buy $10 worth of junk food, right? Come back, stuff all those feelings, right? Because I couldn't grasp the stuff that I had done, and it took a while for me to complete that letter. I had some help with my psychologist as well, and I couldn't meet my victim on my own, so I had to go through the Justice of Restoration to do it. And so I contacted them. I was now ready. I had contacted them. Now, my sponsor taught me well. She said, you never go and make a financial amends with an empty hand, empty pockets. There's no way I do not have $1 million, right? Nowhere near that, right? But what I did have was $1,000. I had saved up $1,000, and that's what I had, right? So the time came, my victim walks in. It's a family-operated business. The dad wouldn't see me, the mother wouldn't see me, but the son agreed. So he walks in, and I thought, oh no, here we go, right? And he sat down, and I said to him that I'll never right the wrongs I've done. I don't give a shit about that. Right? Don't care. Right? My dad wants $450,000 to call it even. I'm willing to take $350,000. And I looked at him and I said, I don't have that kind of money. What about your family? I said, my family doesn't have that kind of money, but what I do have is $1,000, right? And he goes, I don't want your $100 a month, right? And I said, well, would you be willing that if I open up a bank account and I put money into that bank account, and every time that it reaches $1,000, that I put it through the mail slot? He goes, yeah, I would agree to that. And I said, okay, so here's the first $1,000, and then he starts talking to me, right? He's wishing me well. He wants me to, to be able to have a new car, to have a house, to find happiness. And I start tearing up, and he said, why are you starting to cry? And I said, because you're doing it again. He goes, doing what? I said, you're treating me like family, right? Because what that family had done was treated me exactly like family. They trusted me. I was their bookkeeper. They trusted me. They never once opened up a bank account in 5 years because they trusted me, right? At that moment, it became totally apparent. For the first 5 years of my recovery, the dollar amount stopped me dead on my tracks, right? Because where was I ever going to get that money? I didn't see anything beyond that dollar amount. And it wasn't until I put it down in black and white that I saw the mistrust, the dishonesty, all the hurt, how I hurt their pride and their ego. I prevented their family from growing. I took away from their inheritance, you know, and it wasn't until I saw all of that I was able to actually see beyond the dollar amount. And, you know, and he told me it's not about the money, you know, it's about the trust. My dad will never, ever be able to trust another person, right? Because I broke that, you know, and, you know, and I still continue to do that. And it's funny because every time I put money into that bank account, I get an overtime shift. You know, so when I come out of prison, I can no longer work in that field. The only kind of work that I know is retail. Retail involves money. If I'm working with money, I'm going to take it because I don't have enough. And even if I have enough, I still want more, right? So I go to my addictions doctor and I go, I need to do something that's not going to be in the line of money. So while I was in prison, there was Elizabeth Fry used to come in and bring us treats on Friday nights and play games with us. And there was this one girl there that I used to talk to, and I told her I think I'm going to go and be a medical office assistant. Right? That doesn't deal with money, right? And she said, well, why don't you become a nursing unit assistant? I said, well, what's that? And she said, you're in the hospital and you're processing doctor's orders. It pays more. You're in a union, you know. She said, that's what I do. And I said, well, can you go back to your employer and ask them if they would hire someone like me with a criminal record? So she comes back, and I said, you can tell them exactly what I've done. So she comes back and she said, you know, you stand a pretty good chance because they have to hire people in minority as well. So, you know, I'm older, right? And I got a criminal record, so I stand a pretty good chance. So when I came out, I investigated that, and I went at 50 years old. I re-educated myself, you know, and then I couldn't get a job. Right, I couldn't get a job right away, so I'm getting all nervous, right? So I go to my drug and alcohol addictions counselor, and I tell him, you know, I'm going to have to go and get a job in retail, and if I'm dealing with money, I'm going to steal it. And he looks at me, and he goes, grabs a prescription pad, and he starts writing it out, and he tears it up, folds it, hands it to me, and he goes, make sure you show that to your sponsor. I said, okay. So when I get out of his office, I open it up and it said, go walk a fucking dog, right? That doesn't involve money, right? I'm like, holy shit, he was right, you know? So I did what I had to do, and I applied at one of the hospitals, and I'm outside of the hospital. A friend of ours OD'd, and we're out there with her, supporting her, and all of a sudden I get this phone call from Human Resources, right? Asking me to come in and explain my criminal record to them, right? So I on the phone, and I said, no problem. You tell me where and when, and I will be there, right? And so they tell me where and when I hung up, I went, what the hell was that, right? Like, God will do for you what you cannot do for yourself, right? Because I was, you know, scared shitless. Now I gotta go in there and explain my criminal record, you know, like, holy shit, right? So I walk in there, held my head up high. You know, Kenny touched on it, you know, go high, right? So I walked in there, held my head up high, and told them, right? At that time, I was 5.5 years clean. 5.5 years clean. I'm in a program of 12-step fellowship. I help others, right? I'm of service, right? And I embezzled money to support a drug habit. I re-educated myself to be in a position where I don't have to deal with money so that I won't reoffend. And she said, well, I have two things to say. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And she said, one, congratulations on all the work that you've done and that you will continue to do. And secondly, you've been cleared to work in all areas of the hospital. Holy shit, really? Right? So I started a new career. The criminal record didn't stop me from achieving things. What would have stopped me is my fears, my self-doubt, right? But the program had given me the tools, right? By having worked the 12 steps to the best of my ability, it had given me the tools to be able to deal with the stuff, the promises, right? Like I said, God will do for you what you cannot do for yourself, From there, it grew. From there, it just grew. I wanted to be of service to CA on a different level. I wanted to be of service to CA at world level. In order for me to be of service to CA at world level, I had to cross the border. I have a criminal record. I cannot cross the border. What do I have to do to get that? So I started the process. I called up my sponsor and said, I'm going to apply for a U.S. waiver so I can go to the States, so I can share my experience, strength, and hope with them and be of service for Cocaine Anonymous at world level. And she said, oh, good. I said, but I'm not going to tell them I changed my clean date. And she said, oh, so you're going to be dishonest. Honesty is the best policy. And I said, well, fine. Then I will just tell them that I've been a prominent member of cocaine, And, for, at that time, it was, 10 years, right? And she said, oh, so now you're going to try to manipulate the situation. Fuck. Right? Okay, fine. I had just taken my 1 year. And I went home the next day, and I sat at the computer, and I typed out my story, right? And in my story, I mentioned Cocaine Anonymous. I mentioned I embezzled money. I mentioned that because you have to tell them, what you've done and what you're doing now. So basically sharing your experience, strength, and hope with them, right? So I typed it all out. I thought, fine, there. Not lying. Not manipulating, just being truthful, and now it's in God's hand to see what happens, right? By the grace of God, I got a 1-year waiver. First thing I did is I went across the border and I shared my experience, strength, and hope, right? Applied for another waiver, got it, went and served at World for CA. This will be my 3rd year going. Without having worked the 12 steps, without cocaine, without the fellowship, without God, I wouldn't have been given this life. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do. I travel. I'm able to help others. What I shared in my 5th step, my very first step 5, is now open. I now share it openly, with other women, sometimes from the podium, if need be, right? It no longer has that hold. For the first 5 years, if I said what I had done, right, if I mentioned the amount of money, I couldn't say it without crying, right? Because that's shame and guilt and remorse. I'm not saying that shame and guilt and remorse isn't still there, but it doesn't have that hold on me anymore, right? Because I'm doing the next right thing. I'm doing what I can to make it right, So the 12 steps, and by the grace of God, has given me a life that what I thought when you guys talked about it when I first came in, has given me a life beyond my wildest imagination, right? I never thought that I would be able to have this. I thought when I came into these rooms that my life was going to be doom and gloom, and that it was basically the end, right? What has happened instead? is I've been given a newfound life, right? I've been given a life beyond. I have been rocketed into the fourth dimension. And you too can be rocketed into the fourth dimension. If you haven't gone through the steps and you haven't gone through the big book, grab somebody. There's lots of us that can help you and will help you. And you're guaranteed, if you do this, that you don't have to go back out. And doing your first set of steps is not going to be your last. I put a semicolon at the end of my step 12 and went and did it again. And the great thing about working with others is that when you do work with others, you're going through the steps over again anyway. So you're constantly in them, and your conscious contact with your higher power of your own understanding grows, right? I have no idea what my God is, and I don't think it's any of my business. All I know is that God works through me and in me, and when I stop, when I'm agitated and I stop and I pause, God enters, right? So thanks you very much for asking me to come, and you too can be rocketed into the fourth dimension. I wish you guys all the very best in your recovery. Thanks. I'm Simonne. I'm a cocaine addict.